Hello and welcome to Chapter 4 of my Halloween story, Widicker Woods. Now before we get started on this chapter, if you have not heard the other chapters, first please go back and listen to it from Chapter 1. Also, this story does take place in the 1860s during slavery, so it does talk about slavery and things of that nature. So without further ado, let's get started. The woman shut the door and introduced herself as Mina, and she introduced the other woman as Brandy. She told Joe that they too were slaves. They said that they were brought there after they were caught trying to escape from their plantation. They said they had been stuck in Widicker Woods for 13 years already, and they explained how you never age a day as long as you're in the woods. As if you will be tortured forever as long as you live by the hauntings of the woods. Who knew the fountain of youth was in the heart of hell? She also explained that the sun never rises in Widicker Woods. It has always been and will always be night, as long as evil still controls the woods. Joe asked if it ever stops raining. She told him the weather changes drastically. One moment it will be raining and the next moment it will be snowing. Then turn into the thickest fog you've ever seen. They all sat down on the floor and began to tell Mina and Brandy about themselves. When they got to Tracy, he told them he was a country singer and worship leader. "We've got an old guitar upstairs we would like to hear you play," Brandy told him. "I'll go get it." Brandy raced upstairs. Tabitha looked at Lucy and said, "How did y'all get to this house?" "Well, we were being chased by 3 witches that were flying above us on brooms. And we just so happened to see this house through the fog, and we ran in here. There was no one here except a bunch of giant rats and spiders, but we ran most of those out." "Most of them?" asked Samantha. Mina smiled, but before she had a chance to answer, Brandy came back in the room with the guitar and handed it to Tracy. So Tracy began to play a song. And then he sang a song called "I See It Now." Joe and Tabitha got up and went and sat down by the fireplace. Tracy began to sing a song that talks about the stars over Texas. "That's a nice song," said Tabitha. "Yes, it is," said Joe. "Thank you for being so protective over me," she told him, smiling. He looked over at her and said, "I think I'm falling in love with you." "I've already fallen in love with you," she replied. Joe smiled and they leaned into each other and kissed. "Brandy, is there a room we could sleep in? We're dreadfully tired. It's been a very long night." "We have enough rooms for all of you," said Mina. "Take them to the room with the window." Brandy led everyone up to their rooms. "We'd like to stay here and try to discuss a way out of Widicker Woods tomorrow," Joe told her. So Joe and Tabitha settled in their room and made love together for the first time, and then fell off to sleep. Later that night, the wind was blowing very hard, making the shutters on the windows clack, and tree limbs bang that towered over the house brushed against the wooden shingles on the roof. Lightning flashed through the windows, casting eerie shadows of trees on the wall. The loud roar of thunder outside echoed through the giant house. While Joe and Tabitha slept, a new vampire opened their window and crawled through. He stood over Tabitha, watching her sleep. Then he leaned over, as if to bite Tabitha. But Joe turned over in his sleep, and the vampire crawled back out of the window and flew off as a bat into the night. Hours later, Mina came in everyone's room and woke everyone up. Joe looked over at Tabitha to wake her up, and he noticed she was very pale. He shook her to wake her up, asking her if she was okay. She barely opened her eyes and moaned. Joe rushed downstairs to alert Mina and the others of her terrible condition. They all ran upstairs, and Mina knelt down beside Tabitha. "What's wrong with her?" Joe asked. Mina examined her. "Do you remember anything happening to you last night?" "No," Tabitha replied. "Nothing." "I'm so cold," Tabitha exclaimed. Mina touched her arm and looked at Joe. "She's freezing," Mina stated. "But how? The house is really warm in here," Felicia remarked. Mina turned Tabitha's face to look at her neck. "Aha! Just as I thought. She's been attacked by a vampire." She showed everyone the 2 puncture marks on her neck. Everyone gasped. "Impossible!" Joe shouted. "There was no vampire here." "Most of her blood has been taken. That's why she's so weak and pale," said Brandy. "Yes, and now that she's been bitten by a vampire, she will be under his control if he comes near her again. And it's also possible that she will become one herself, or he could make her one of his slaves," Mina added. "Can we pray for her?" Joe asked. "Yes, we can always pray," said Brandy. So Pastor Toby knelt down beside Tabitha, laid his hands on her, and began to pray for her. But as he did, Tabitha began to convulse and act as if she was in pain or discomfort. Toby stopped praying and looked back at everyone. The vampire's evil is already in her. We can only hope she won't become one now. Joe began to pace the floor of the room and worry. All we can do is let her rest and watch over her, and hope that that thing doesn't come back again. It already knows she's here, and it has a taste for her blood," said Mina. "We need garlic," said Felicia. "Yes, but there is none in Widicker Woods. Dracula rules over every creature in Widicker Woods. He would not grow the one thing that repels him." As Brandy was speaking, Joe interrupted her by saying, "Dracula doesn't rule over shit. I killed him. He's dead. We all saw him die." Mina looked up at Joe and replied back by saying, "Joe, this was Dracula that you saw looking through your window. Dracula doesn't send his slaves out to attack. You may have seen Dracula's body indeed pass away to dust, but if Dracula had a male slave, then he could be resurrected and take the youth of his male slave." "Well, he only had 3 women slaves," Joe told her. "But Benjamin was attacked and he became a slave," Felicia shouted. Mina looked over slowly at Joe. "Is that true?" she asked. "Damn! Yes, it's true. I forgot about him. He tried to attack me," Joe replied. "And yes, he was young like us. But Dracula was old, really old. Then that means that his slaves have taken Benjamin's blood and rubbed it into Dracula's ashes. That resurrects Dracula and he takes Benjamin's youth. He becomes as young as Benjamin. And he'll become 3 times as strong as he was before when he was old. That must be why you were able to so easily defeat him before. And because he's so young, he won't just be looking for a new slave. He'll be looking for an eternal bride to rule over Widicker Woods with him," Mina explained. "Well, he's not taking Tabitha," Joe shouted. So they stayed in the house for the next 10 hours, taking turns watching over Tabitha. It had become terribly cold, and a bad snowstorm had taken over the woods. The others were downstairs by the fire, so Joe decided to bring Tabitha down by the fire to keep her warm. "Can I get you something, darling?" he asked her. She looked up at him and everyone else and said, "I'm so very thirsty." "Tracy, grab some water," Joe demanded. No, Tabitha said angrily. I mean, do you have something red, like wine? No, Mina stated boldly. Only water. Mina looked at Joe and walked over to him and whispered in his ear, Has she always had a taste for wine? No, he replied. That's a bit strange. She didn't want wine when we were dining at the plantation. She's getting a taste for blood, Joe. After she was bitten, we must keep Dracula away from her no matter what, because if she becomes one of these unholy demons of the night, she will attack and kill every one of us. No, Joe interrupted. No, I won't let that happen. We'll watch over her all day if we have to. I don't know if she'll get better, Joe, Mina replied. Later on, as time passed, Joe sat beside her bedside, guarding over her. As she slept, he began to get exhausted after what seemed to be hours and hours of watching Tabitha toss and turn, moan and groan. Joe called Tracy into the room and asked him to stay awake and watch over her. He handed Tracy a revolver. Tracy put his cowboy hat back on and looked at Joe and nodded his head, assuring him everything would be okay. Joe and Tabitha walked back downstairs and sat next to the fire, asking Felicia and Vanessa if they were okay. Brandy walked into the room and sat down next to Joe. How do you and Mina know so much about these things here? I mean, y'all know so much about Dracula. How can Dracula spawn into someone else? And how he runs the show, how do you know that? Joe asked. Well, she started, you see, Mina and I weren't the first ones to end up here. In fact, we're not the only ones who are here. There's others, hiding, waiting, for some type of savior or hero to come and rescue us all from this sinister existence. See, when we first came here, we met some people who saved us. There were 6 of them. They taught us everything we know about this place. Mina doesn't like to talk about them because they were like family to us, and she feels as though they left us. Betrayed us. What do you mean left y'all? I thought there was no way out, Joe asked. Brandy laughed slightly. Huh, no, there is a way out. Suicide, she exclaimed. 3 hung themselves. The ones who were like parents to us went crazy. They had been trapped here for over 60 years, living in fear. So one day the husband walked up behind his wife and said, I'll get us out of here. He pointed the gun at her and pulled the trigger. Then he put the revolver in his own mouth and took his own life. Then the other one, who was left like a brother to us, him and Mina were real close. He kept seeing things that we couldn't. He said they were unspeakable things. Things so frightening that he would not even dare to tell us what he was seeing. He got to the point where he couldn't even close his eyes and dream without having nightmares about the unholy terrors of what he so unwantedly been terrorized by and seen in his day life. So what happened to him? Asked Felicia. Brandy looked at Felicia, then looked around at everyone else who was listening. He got to the point where he couldn't take seeing the hauntings anymore. So he ripped his own eyeballs out and wandered off into the woods. We haven't seen him since. We don't know if he died and his spirit finally left this place to go be with the Lord, or if he became one of those monsters outside the doors. For all we know, he probably didn't even believe in God anymore. He used to be strong in his faith. He said when he was free before he came to this place, but there towards the end he changed. He'd say, how can a loving God exist and know that we're stuck in a place like this? This concludes Chapter 4 of Widicker Woods. Please let me know what you thought about this chapter in the comments below. If you want to hear Chapter 5, please subscribe to this channel. I will be releasing Chapter 5 either today or tomorrow. Let me know what you thought about this chapter in the comments, guys. As always, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm, helps get more views and get this story out. Halloween is coming up, so that's why I wanted to do this book. And this book is already written. I started working on it about 8 or 9 years ago. It's all written down in a spiral, so sometimes I'm stopping and trying to read what I wrote. My handwriting is that of a kindergartner. It's just really bad, so I apologize for that. But until next time, guys, I'm Joe Jones. This is the Cup of Joe Show, and this has just been Chapter 4 of Widicker Woods.